So today we're thrilled to be joined by Dr. Cara Goodwin of Parenting Translator to talk about research and how we can best determine what will inform our parenting practices based on the research that we consume. So thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Well, I'm really excited for this conversation because I think it's something that we're definitely both passionate about, right? As researchers, as parents, as psychologists, really thinking about how research can best promote us in our parenting journey.
Yes, definitely. So, we both share so much research on social media and, on our websites and elsewhere. And I think, we get a lot of feedback from parents about that and saying things like, I read this study. I feel like this is what I need to do with my kids. And, sometimes that can create a lot of pressure and shame. So I was just hoping we could have a conversation about how do you digest all of the research that's out there and what do you need to consider when you're taking the research and applying it to your everyday parenting life?
Such an important conversation. And I think you and I are so well versed in the research, but I know, as we've spoken about before, right, even having that background, it can make you anxious as a parent if you feel like you're not following what has been, proven to potentially be good, or you're doing something that maybe you're like, oh, the research is saying this isn't great for my child. Like, let's say screen time, which we can delve into a little later, but it can make you feel really bad as a parent, I think sometimes.
Yes, I totally agree. I think it's often the feedback I get from parents when I share research is, this doesn't seem to apply to my child, or, this makes me feel bad because I haven't been doing that. And so I think it's really important to, first of all, be, consumers of research and understand like what is high quality research. When should I really be thinking about this and making parenting decisions? When does the study, maybe I shouldn't really worry too much about it. And then, how do you apply that actually in the everyday decisions that you make?
Yes. So, we were talking before, right, about sort of takeaways for parents and thinking about, okay, what's most important. So, like you were saying, right, research is about sort of the average child, the average family, and it's not necessarily geared to any individual child or family, and thinking about how when we read something, if it doesn't seem to relate to us or our children, that's okay. That's actually the purpose of research often is to look sort of at the mean and not individual variation.
Yes. Yeah. So one of the big takeaways from research is that nearly every research study, that isn't focused on individual differences is going to tell you what works for most children. So, most research studies look at averages. And so the results only say what works for most children. And so that does not mean that it necessarily works for your individual child. But I think research can be helpful when you feel like really clueless about where to start, because you can be like, oh, okay, this is what works for most children. So maybe I can try that first, but if it doesn't work for your child, like, you should feel so free to move on to try other things. And if something different works for your child that isn't necessarily backed by research, it doesn't mean that it's wrong. It just means that your child is different from, the average child, and all children are in some way. So there are going to be things, for all of our children that, research is saying this works for most children, but it still doesn't work for my child. All children are going to fall outside of the norm somewhere.
Yes, definitely. And, also thinking about who is part of the research studies that we read about and report on. So often, right, they're very white, middle class participants. Often it's college students, right? Like samples of convenience if you're a professor at a university, as well as sometimes animal studies. And what we can extrapolate to those who are not the target population of the study, it's sometimes is questionable, right?
Exactly. So, when you hear about a research study, you want to think, okay, who is this studying? It's often, it's often constricted to the United States or other Western countries. It's often upper and middle class families. It's often, two-parent households. It really does not, most of the research that's out there doesn't apply to every child because it involves a very specific type of sample. So you want to look at who does this study include? Does that seem relatable to my situation and my child before you really apply it to your situation?
Definitely. And, another thing, right, that we often say is correlation is not causation, right? The favorite line from a stats course.
Yeah.
But how that really does apply in these cases, especially when we're talking about parenting research.
Yes. So I, on my social media, I love taking, media articles that are out there and breaking them down for parents and being like, okay, this is what the media said, but this is what this study really means. And most of the issues that I come across are correlation is not causation. There's a recent study that said social media changes the brain. And, we have no evidence from that study that social media actually changes the brain because it's a correlational study, which means they only found an association between checking social media and brain differences. And an association does not mean that the social media caused the brain differences. There could be another cause that we don't know about. An example that I always give is, you might look at data on shark attacks and people eating ice cream. And you could look at, the days people eat a lot of ice cream, there are more shark attacks, and, conclude that eating ice cream causes shark attacks. But it's really, there's another cause that, is hidden in there, which is that on hotter days, people are more likely to eat ice cream. And on hotter days, people are more likely to swim in the ocean. And, that these are correlated because there's some underlying cause. And that when you see a correlation, it just means that they're related. And that's just, information for us to have to think about, what further research do we need? It doesn't mean that one thing causes another thing.
I love that example. That's such a great way to really put it, sort of in very concrete terms of what we mean when we're talking about associations. So something else that, I think we talk a lot about is replication, right? And the importance of replication when we look at studying these associations and trying to figure out what's causing them. Do they exist in different populations? So can you speak a little bit about this and why it's so important?
Yes. So, I like to say that one study is just one study, and it doesn't really mean anything when we have, even if it's a really high quality study. In research, we really need to have like a body of research that consistently finds the same thing. So in research, even in the most high quality studies, there's, as high of a 5% chance that association doesn't exist in most studies. So there's always a chance that the research study finding is just totally false. So you want to see a consistent pattern of finding. So if you see, one study that's, shown by the media of this causes this, screen time causes some sort of really scary negative impact. It's just one study. And it doesn't mean that, you've harmed your child in some way until you see a consistent body of high quality research that shows that something causes something else. That's when you would get concerned. But one study does not mean that there is really a cause for concern yet. And I think the media, when they cover studies, don't really point that out. They might point out a scary study, and then they might fail to mention that there's also a lot of research that shows the opposite, that there isn't a relationship here. So you just want to be very careful to not overinterpret from just one study, because there's very little that we can learn from just one study.
And I think what's interesting too, and sort of thinking where you get sort of to this place where only one study is featured, is also even in the peer review process, right? When you think about journals, so often if you do not replicate a finding, those actually don't get published, but that's an important finding of itself, right? When things aren't replicated. But there is a lot of research that sits sort of, in the drawer and that we don't hear about as well. So just really driving home that point of how important it is to see that things do, you see that these consistent patterns across different populations and in different circumstances, in order to feel either worried or not worried, right?
Yes. Yeah. We call that in research, like the file drawer problem is, there could be studies that find no links between screen time and these negative outcomes, but those aren't going to be accepted for publication because it's not exciting to say screen time is linked to no brain differences, like, so we're going to be more likely to see, okay, screen time is linked to this and this and this. And when the media covers it, they're not going to say, screen time was found not to be linked to brain differences in all of these regions, but was only linked to brain differences in this one region. They're just going to highlight the big differences and the exciting findings, not, a lack of finding is just not exciting for these scientific journals or for the media articles. So there's a lot of stuff out there that never even reaches the public.
Totally. So I'm excited that we're doing a little bit of a different format, and you and I are going to get to come together again and answer folks' questions in real time. So I think it would be great to, sort of wrap up now and talk about really the 4 takeaways that we just spoke about. And we're looking forward to getting audience questions in a few weeks.
Yes, that would be great. Yeah, I think it's so important for parents to remember that research is like just a small part of your parenting decisions. And we would love to answer any questions about how do I determine if research is high quality? How do I, use that research to make decisions? How do I know when it does apply to my life and it doesn't? And we'd be happy even to discuss specific research studies if you want to bring those to us. And is this high quality? Does this make sense? And we could break those down for parents if that would be helpful.
You and I love to do that. So hopefully folks will bring their studies. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, and looking forward to seeing you again soon.
Yes, thank you so much.